Hank Dalton woke at 5:47 a.m. to a feeling he couldn't name. Not a sound, not a dream, just a weight pressing against his ribs like a hand reaching through the dark, telling him something was wrong. He sat on the edge of his bed in the small rental house he'd moved into after the divorce, boots still by the door, leather vest draped over the chair. The morning light hadn't yet broken over the mountains, and the world outside was silent except for the occasional rumble of a truck on the highway. But inside his chest, there was noise. Hank was 48 years old. He'd been riding with the Hells Angels for over 20 years. He'd seen violence, loss, brotherhood, and betrayal. He knew what fear felt like. He knew what danger smelled like. This was different. This was about Jacob, his son, 12 years old. Quiet kid. Too quiet lately. Hank had noticed it over the past few weeks during their weekend visits. Jacob used to talk about school, about his friends, about the things kids talk about. But recently, he'd gone silent. Gave one-word answers. Stared at his phone. Flinched when Hank asked how things were going. Lisa, Hank's ex-wife, had brushed it off. He's 12, Hank. This is what they do. They pull away. But Hank knew better. He'd seen that look before, in men who'd been broken and didn't know how to say it. He grabbed his keys. Westbrook Middle School sat at the edge of town like a brick fortress, surrounded by chain-link fences and bare trees that hadn't yet bloomed for spring. Hank pulled his Harley into the visitor lot just after 8, cutting the engine and letting the silence settle around him. The school felt wrong. He couldn't explain it, but the air was heavy, oppressive. As he walked toward the main entrance, students turned to stare. Some whispered. Others froze mid-step, eyes wide. A few teachers glanced at him through classroom windows, then quickly looked away. Hank wasn't wearing his colors, just jeans, boots, and a plain jacket. But people knew who he was. In a town this small, everyone knew. He reached the front office and pushed through the door. The receptionist looked up, her smile faltering. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see my son, Jacob Dalton." She hesitated. Is he expecting you?" "No." "Well, I'll need to. I'm his father," Hank said evenly. "I'd like to see him." The woman's fingers hovered over her keyboard. She glanced toward the principal's office, then back at Hank. "Let me just check if he's in class." Hank didn't wait. He turned and walked into the hallway. Behind him, the receptionist called out, but he kept moving. The halls were a maze of lockers and fluorescent lights. Hank moved slowly, scanning faces, looking for his son. Kids pressed themselves against the walls as he passed. A few teachers stepped out of classrooms, watching him with wary eyes. One of them, a young man in a cheap tie, stepped forward. "Sir, you can't just. I'm looking for my son. You need to go through the office." Hank stopped. He turned to face the teacher, and something in his expression made the man take a step back. "Where's Jacob Dalton?" The teacher swallowed. I don't know." Hank moved past him. At the end of the hall, near the bathrooms, he saw it. Jacob's backpack. The blue one with the reflective stripes. It was sitting in a trash bin, half buried under crumpled paper and food wrappers. Hank pulled it out. The zipper was broken. One of the straps had been torn clean off. His jaw tightened. A janitor was mopping nearby, an older man with gray hair and tired eyes. He glanced at Hank, then at the backpack. "You his dad?" "Yeah." The janitor leaned on his mop. "Your boy. He's been having a hard time." "What do you mean?" The man looked down the hall, then back at Hank. "I ain't supposed to say nothing. But if it was my kid," he nodded toward the gym. "Check out back. Behind the building." Hank didn't say thank you. He just moved. The gym was at the far end of the school, connected by a covered walkway. Hank followed the path until he reached the back doors, then stepped outside into the cold morning air. And that's when he saw them. 3 boys. Older, maybe 14 or 15. They were standing in a half circle, blocking someone against the brick wall. Jacob. His son was pressed back against the building, arms wrapped around himself, eyes wide and red. He wasn't crying. He was past that. He looked hollow. One of the boys was laughing. Another was holding Jacob's jacket, dangling it just out of reach. And 10 feet away, leaning against the wall with her arms folded, was a teacher. She was watching, doing nothing. Hank's vision tunneled. He crossed the distance in 6 strides, his boots crunching on gravel. The boys turned, their smirks fading. The teacher straightened up, eyes going wide. "Back off," Hank said quietly. The boys scattered. Hank didn't look at them. He didn't look at the teacher. He looked at his son. Jacob's face crumpled. His whole body shook. And when Hank opened his arms, Jacob collapsed into them, sobbing so hard he couldn't breathe. "I'm here," Hank whispered, his hand on the back of his son's head. "I'm here, son. I've got you." The teacher started to say something, some excuse, some justification, but Hank turned his head and looked at her. She stopped, and she walked away. Hank's truck was parked in the far corner of the lot, away from the school, away from the eyes. Jacob sat in the passenger seat, knees pulled up to his chest, staring out the window. He'd stopped crying, but his face was still red, his hands still shaking. Hank didn't push. He just sat there, engine idling, giving Jacob the space to speak when he was ready. Finally, Jacob's voice came out, small and broken. It's been happening for months." Hank's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "They started with name-calling," Jacob continued. "Then they started taking my stuff, pushing me, tripping me in the halls. And every time I told a teacher, they'd say I was overreacting, or that I probably started it." "Who?" "Mr. Brennan, Mrs. Costas, Principal Adams." Hank's jaw clenched. "Adams knew." Jacob nodded. "He called me into his office last week. Told me if I kept causing problems, he'd have to suspend me. He said kids like me bring it on themselves." Hank felt something crack inside his chest. "Dad," Jacob whispered, his voice trembling. "I didn't want you to think I was weak." Hank turned to his son. He reached out and put a hand on Jacob's shoulder. "Listen to me," he said, his voice steady. "You are not weak. You hear me? You are not weak." Jacob's eyes filled with tears again. "You survived," Hank said. "You got up every day and faced them. That's not weakness, Jacob. That's strength. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." Jacob leaned into his father, and Hank held him until the shaking stopped. Principal Richard Adams was a man who believed in order. He believed in rules, policies, and maintaining the appearance of control. He did not believe in parents who showed up unannounced, especially not parents like Hank Dalton. When Hank walked into his office without knocking, Adams stood up behind his desk, his face already tight with irritation. "Mr. Dalton, you can't just—" "My son's been bullied for months," Hank said, his voice low and even. "And you did nothing." Adams blinked. "I'm sorry, but I don't know what Jacob's told you. But he told me you threatened to suspend him. Mr. Dalton, your son has a history of exaggeration. We've tried to work with him, but he's difficult." Hank took a step forward. "He's 12, and these situations are complicated," Adams said quickly. "Boys will be boys. We can't micromanage every interaction. If we suspended every child who had a disagreement. This wasn't a disagreement. This was bullying, and you knew about it." Adams' expression shifted. Just for a second, something flickered behind his eyes. Guilt, maybe, or fear. "I've handled everything appropriately," he said. "And frankly, Mr. Dalton, your lifestyle doesn't exactly inspire confidence. You bikers bring trouble, not solutions." Hank's hands curled into fists, but he didn't move. He didn't shout. He just stared at Adams until the principal looked away. "You didn't handle anything," Hank said quietly. "You buried it." Adams' face went pale. Hank turned and walked out. Outside the school, Hank stood in the parking lot, hands trembling. Not from fear, from rage, from heartbreak. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a name, Steele. Steele picked up on the first ring. "Hank, I need you." There was a pause. Then, "What happened?" Hank told him. "Not everything. Just enough." When he finished, Steele's voice was steady and cold. "Where are you?" Westbrook Middle School. Stay there. You're not alone, brother. The call ended. Hank stood there, staring at his phone. He didn't know what was going to happen next. He didn't know if this would fix anything. But he knew he wasn't going to let his son face this alone anymore. In the next hour, something extraordinary happened. Steele made one call. That call became 2. Then 5. Then 20. Across 3 counties, phones buzzed. Text messages traveled like wildfire through the brotherhood. Brother needs us. Westbrook Middle School. Noon. Come quiet. No questions asked. No hesitation. Just brothers answering the call. While Hank waited, a woman approached him in the parking lot. She was young, maybe late 20s, wearing a cardigan and carrying a stack of papers. Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying. Mr. Dalton? Hank turned. I'm Miss Rivera. I teach 7th grade. I need to tell you something. Hank waited. Your son isn't being bullied because he's weak, she said, her voice shaking. He's being bullied because he's brave. Hank frowned. What do you mean? There's a boy in my class. His name is Ethan. He's autistic, nonverbal. And those 3 boys, the ones who've been tormenting Jacob, they used to go after Ethan every day. They'd steal his things, mock him, corner him in the bathroom. Hank's stomach tightened. Jacob stepped in. Miss Rivera continued. He stood between them and Ethan. He told them to stop. And when they wouldn't, Jacob took the hits instead. Hank's breath caught. That's why they've been targeting him, she said. Because he wouldn't back down. Because he protected someone who couldn't protect himself. Hank looked back toward the school, toward the building where his son had suffered in silence for months. Why didn't you say something? He asked quietly. Miss Rivera's eyes filled with tears. I tried. I reported it. But Adams, he said it would damage the school's reputation. He told me to stay out of it. Hank's jaw tightened. I'm sorry, she whispered. I should have done more. Hank didn't respond. He just turned and walked back to his truck, where Jacob was sitting. He opened the door and crouched down so he was eye level with his son. Jacob, he said, Miss Rivera told me what you did. About Ethan. Jacob looked down. You protected him, Hank said. You stood up when no one else would. Jacob's voice was barely a whisper. I couldn't just let them hurt him, Dad. Hank's eyes burned. He reached out and put his hand on Jacob's cheek. You're more of a man than they'll ever be, he said. Jacob's lip trembled, and for the first time in months, he almost smiled. Inside the school, Principal Adams was in full damage control mode. He'd already called the district office, spinning the story, an aggressive parent. A troubled child. Exaggerated claims. Now he was in his office, scrolling through digital records, altering disciplinary files, deleting incident reports. He didn't notice Miss Rivera standing in the doorway, her phone recording. What are you doing? She asked quietly. Adams looked up, startled. Excuse me. You're erasing the reports. The ones I filed. The ones other teachers filed. Miss Rivera, I don't think you understand how. I understand perfectly, she said. You're covering it up. Adams stood. You're overstepping. I suggest you. I've been recording this conversation, she said, holding up her phone. And I have copies of every report you just deleted. Adams' face went white. You can fire me if you want, Miss Rivera said. But I'm not staying quiet anymore. She turned and walked out. At 11:47 a.m., a sound began to roll across the town. Low, deep, unmistakable. The rumble of motorcycle engines. Students in classrooms looked up. Teachers paused mid-sentence. Parents in the pickup line turned their heads. The sound grew louder. The first bikes appeared at the edge of the school property, 10 of them, riding in formation, slow and deliberate. Then 20 more. Then 30. By the time they reached the front of the school, there were 97. 97 Hells Angels, lined up in perfect rows along the street. Engines idling in unison like a heartbeat. They didn't rev their engines. They didn't shout. They didn't threaten. They just stood, silent, unified, waiting. Hank stepped out of his truck. Jacob followed, hesitant, his eyes wide as he took in the sight before him. 97 brothers. All of them there for him. Steele stepped forward first, a mountain of a man with a gray beard and eyes that had seen too much. He clasped Hank's shoulder. "You good?" Hank nodded. "I am now." Steele looked down at Jacob. "You must be the kid." Jacob nodded, unable to speak. "You did good, son," Steele said. "Real good." The other bikers formed a protective half-circle behind Hank and Jacob. No one spoke. No one moved aggressively. They just stood there, a wall of leather and steel and loyalty. Parents began to gather. Some looked frightened. Others looked curious. A few pulled out their phones and started recording. One mother stepped forward, her face pale. "What's going on?" Hank turned to her. "My son's been bullied for months." The school knew. They did nothing. They tried to cover it up. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Another parent spoke up. "My daughter said the same thing. She said the teachers ignored her when she reported kids pushing her." "My son too," another voice called out. The murmurs grew louder. Principal Adams appeared at the front entrance, flanked by 2 security guards. His face was red, his voice shaking. "This is private property. You need to leave immediately, or I'll call the police." Steele stepped forward. "Go ahead. Call them." Adams faltered. "We're not trespassing," Steele said. "We're standing on a public street. And we're not leaving until every parent here knows what you've been hiding." That's when Miss Rivera stepped forward. She held up her phone, her hand trembling, but her voice steady. "I have a recording," she said loudly, "of Principal Adams admitting he knew about the bullying, and of him deleting the reports." The crowd went silent. Adams' face went from red to white. That's a lie. She's." "Play it," a parent shouted. Miss Rivera pressed play. Adams' voice crackled through the phone speaker. "You're erasing the reports. The ones I filed." "Miss Rivera, I don't think you understand how. You're covering it up." The recording continued. Every word, every admission. By the time it ended, the crowd was seething. A black SUV pulled up to the curb, and a woman in a suit stepped out, Superintendent Karen Hollis. She looked at Adams, then at the bikers, then at the crowd of parents. "Principal Adams," she said coldly, "you're suspended pending investigation. Effective immediately." Adams opened his mouth to protest, but Hollis held up a hand. "Security will escort you off the property. Now." The crowd erupted in applause. After the chaos settled, after the cameras stopped rolling and the parents began to disperse, the bikers remained. Steele knelt down in front of Jacob, his massive frame suddenly gentle. "You know what courage is, kid?" Jacob shook his head. "It's not about being the biggest or the toughest," Steele said. "It's about standing up when everyone else walks away. And you did that. You stood up for someone who couldn't stand up for himself." Jacob's eyes filled with tears. "You ever need us," Steele said, "we ride. You understand?" Jacob nodded. One by one, the other bikers approached. Some shook Jacob's hand. Others clapped him on the shoulder. A few just nodded, offering silent respect. For the first time in months, Jacob stood a little taller. He felt safe. In the weeks that followed, Westbrook Middle School transformed. The district implemented a zero-tolerance bullying policy, one with teeth. Teachers received mandatory training on recognizing and addressing harassment. A full-time counselor was hired. Parents formed a watchdog committee to ensure accountability. And in front of the school, a small bronze plaque was installed. "No child stands alone." The story made local news, then regional, then national. Not because of the bikers, but because of what they represented. A community refusing to look away. A father refusing to let his son suffer in silence. A brotherhood standing up for what was right. 3 weeks later, Hank and Jacob sat on a hill overlooking the school. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Jacob was quieter now, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not the silence of fear, the silence of peace. "Dad," Jacob said. "Yeah. Thank you." Hank looked at his son. "You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do," Jacob said. "You came when I needed you, even when I didn't ask." Hank's throat tightened. You weren't weak, he said. You were brave alone. Now you're brave with us. Jacob rested his head on his father's shoulder. In the distance, the low rumble of engines echoed across the valley, brothers heading home after another ride. But the sound didn't feel ominous anymore. It felt like protection, like family, like thunder rolling across the sky, reminding the world. Some things are worth standing for, and no child should ever stand alone.